Here's a car which needs no introduction. Vapid's 100 kiloton nostalgia bomb is as stereotypical to American culture as cheeseburgers and expensive pharmaceuticals. Like its name implies, this definitive pony car has dominated popular culture and adolescent bank accounts since the mid-1960s. It was also a comfortable middle ground between affordability and performance, which means getting your hands on a Dominator is as easy for you as it is for a Dominator to get its treads on sidewalk bystanders. If you wanted one for the looks, grab a 4-cylinder and change the badges, and if anyone at the lot so much as asks you to pop open the hood, berate them in their car instead. Everyone knows a strategic offense is the best defense. If you start work at 5 AM and have some extra cash to blow, why not add the extra 4 cylinders and become the cold start rapscallion of suburbia? Your neighbors will be thrilled with your early morning fire-spitting wake-up calls. If daily commutes between the diner and the driving range didn't scream retiree loud enough, bag yourself that convertible GT. That way everyone can see what their life would have looked like if they had the common sense to invest in the housing market before they were born. As Prometheus gave man fire, Vapid gave man the keys to more horsepower and blatant overconfidence. Which means there's a Dominator for everyone. For better or for worse, this is the flagship American car, and it's the last slice of the American dream money can still reasonably buy. And here's how it happened. The 60s had no shortage of cult classics in its 10 years of war and love. American cars were roided up like factory cattle, tension between Italian exotics got spicy, the United Kingdom was a pop culture machine, and of course the Germans got in with the counterculture beatniks, beach bums, and hippies. Trends like hula hoops, go-go boots, and carpeted bathrooms all came and went, yet the 60s American twist on European roadsters were here to stay. Granted, it was never going to reinvent the wheel when it came to performance or even looks. Hell, it wasn't even the first pony car. Nevertheless, the Dominator effortlessly captured that essence of American space-age optimism. The fact that this new Dominator shared its underpinnings with Vapid's low-shelf economy car didn't bother a soul either. Nor did it matter that the car's back seats made a sardine can look roomy. Vapid's Golden Goose sold faster than its underpaid workers could make them, initiating an arms race amongst the other contenders in the mini-muscle craze. The Dominator performs just about as well as you'd expect. The first iteration of the 7.4 liter wasn't breaking any land speed records, but it did provide excitement. Steering was passable for its day, terrible for ours, while suspension wasn't exactly comfortable either. Any sort of chase through the hilly San Fierro streets was bound to shatter a pelvis or two. As for its styling, compared to its prototype precursors, the production Dominator was practically contemporary. Its low production cost ensured that it would remain grounded in that 60s motif, with subtle curves in the bodywork. Nearly all the Dominators would share the fundamentals of the original: multi-striped taillights, the superior slick-back roof, a wide front grille, and that signature pony car silhouette. But even the top package wasn't enough for the professional racers and chicken farmers out there. A stripe premonition and some tinkering to the gears and front suspension was all it took to transform the mule into a racehorse. To separate these rare examples from the herd, Vapid referred to them as Ellies. There weren't any badges either, so the only way to tell an Ellie from a clone was by checking a few things, like the rear exhaust and where the gas cap was located. Just in time for the Summer of Love, Vapid gave its money printer another refresh. Meet the Dominator GT. No one knows officially what that extra T stood for, but if we were to guess, it might be testosterone. The new look made this slab of American muscle wider, longer, and girthier than ever before. It was an automotive swan song for a decade laced in hallucinogenics, rock music, and violent coups. The GTT had it all: bright colors, vinyl stripes, hood bulges, pillar vents, spoilers, and louvers. The rear tires were even staggered to be aggressively larger than the fronts. Its side profile sharpened up the accent crease from the headlights to the rear quarter, and for some reason the GTT's taillights were rearranged vertically, sparking debate amongst those who actually care. This car proves you can buy the affection of others. Nobody cares if you're a base, executive, or barely legal street machine. For once, it didn't matter what package you had, everyone just wanted to see it. The interior was about as standard as you can imagine. The cluster, doors, and console were all clad in your typical fake wood grain. But this time around, Vapid's signature 450 block meant business. The mad scientists were able to squeeze even more power out of it. This meant your 0 to 60 time was about 7 seconds, drastically reducing your 60 to 0 time, but gas is basically free. If you knew the right person at the Vapid dealership, you could even order your Dominator with a detuned hot ring engine. While the extra weight may feel noticeable in the turns, the GTT is a dramatic improvement in performance all around. Mind you, it could have been better if the nanny state hadn't banned leaded gasoline. Apparently the kids are getting too much brain damage. Ooh. Ultimately, the GT was a buffer for a bleaker future. The space race concluded with a motionless flag atop the moon. The IAA was still hard at work assassinating politicians and civil activists, while the same wars raged on without an end in sight. But worst of all, for auto manufacturers, the next decade would pull the rug out from beneath them entirely. The 1970s can be considered the end times for authentic American muscle. The decade started strong when it brought some of the largest displacement monsters the world had ever seen. Then, 3 years later, everything came crashing down as emission regulations, oil embargoes, and a declining economy became the meteors to America's dinosaurs. Vapid executives were faced with a tough decision: let their velociraptor turn to stone, or evolve into a chicken. It was in that instant the second generation of Dominator was born. Vapid needed people to take their Dominator seriously again. They weren't ready to go full size, but it needed to be bigger and meaner. That meant taking the Fortune platform, shaving it down a smidge, and then building something ahead of its time on top. What emerged was the Dominator FX, a car built from the 80s 2 years early. It had rectangular headlights, independent suspension, rack and pinion steering, and styling from something the sales brochure called aerodynamics, setting it worlds apart from anything else. In fact, it took Imponte an extra 3 years just to catch up. While it would take a while for the Dominator to recover from its malaise afflictions, the FX was a good start. In an offer of good faith, Vapid made sure the FX had a surplus of options over the course of its lifespan: an anemic V8, a slightly less anemic V8, 2 different kinds of V6s, an inline 6, or the classic 4 with the optional turbo. The latter option being just a few horses short of the V8, which itself was finally breaking back into those triple digits. Even the infamous Snake Eater package made its return with the FX. You weren't any faster, but people knew you spent more money on cosmetics and optional snake decals, though most people left that last part unchecked. The FXs were reasonably powerful, inexpensive, and lightweight, so much so that San Andreas' own Highway Patrol requested them as lightweight patrol cars, capable of giving chase to those dentists and fisters. Thus, the SAP FX Interceptor was born, a police car built exclusively for hotshot state troopers bankrolling traffic violations. It's not like you were taking prisoners with the FX's 2+2 seating arrangement anyways. Instead, those rear seats were where tickets could be downgraded to warnings, and confiscated contraband that was too good for the evidence locker could be left. These were so hot, even Port Authority had a couple FXs in their own fleet. From pace car to patrol car, Vapid's new FX was a Swiss Army knife in nearly every market demographic, except for performance luxury. But that isn't to say that Vapid never tried, for there's another, less successful version of the FX out there. One with a fake British accent, seated in obscurity and missed potential. Meet the Uranus, the Dominator time forgot. These days, the only remnants you can find are rotting away in ditches and scrapyards. But there was a time when the Uranus went head-to-head with the likes of Benefactor and Ubermacht. At least in the commercials. The Uranus was a complex experiment between Vapid UK and Vapid of America. Across the pond, the mid-sized Uranus was steamrolling the UK's domestic market, just behind the retinue, easily filling the roles of what they called estates, saloons, and sports coupes. The key is emphasizing the E at the end, gives it some oomph. but chiefly among them was the Uranus Low Speed, a high-performance monster made specifically to help Vapid stay competitive. This particular Uranus was the stuff of legends in motorsport, and nightmares for insurers since they were being stolen like office pens. But that's a story for a later date. The American execs looked at the UK's Uranus sales eagerly, hoping to transplant some of that success into the luxury performance market. At home, Dundry and Albany were being beaten to a pulp by German imports, so the Uranus seemed like an easy win. The real trouble was the boardroom of officials who picked apart every bit of the program. By the end, all that was left of the American Uranus initiative was a low-speed aero package for the FX with an optional spoiler. What's worse, the American Uranus was sold in between the Reginas and Admirals at Dundry dealerships, to a demographic of people between the ages of pensioner and running for a seat in Congress. The official reasoning Vapid gave for its internal sabotage was that selling the Uranus at Vapid dealerships would cheapen the sports luxury appeal of the Uranus. What was more likely was Vapid wanting to protect its prize pony at all costs, which was part of a larger multi-car platform, even if that threat was the exact same car with the European facelift. Unsurprisingly, the car died in no more than 4 years, becoming another footnote in the Dominator's history, while the FX soldiered on until the mid-90s. By then, people were once again waiting for a true-to-form Dominator. After narrowly avoiding a mildly misspelled and inflammatory letter from every middle-aged American dad in the country, Vapid decided not to make the next iteration of its Dominator a 4-cylinder anus. Instead, they moved to a design that was a lot more Dominator-shaped than any other model had been in the last 20 years. Which isn't saying much, but yet again, it was more than what the competition could say. With that in mind, Vapid couldn't have come up with a more contemporary, bland interior if they tried, but the secondary cluster is nice. It wasn't until the turn of the century when things got interesting. The ASP, or ASP if you've been picking up on the whole snake theme, changed the Dominator from mild to wild. The 450 block was back and supercharged. The exhausts were side-piped, and a rear wing the size of a church pew was added for downforce. It also had super aggressive aero, just to remind us which pony car ruled the 2000s. The ASP could even handle slight bends in the road. Granted, it did so with the grace of a senior on a mobility scooter, but it did it. The ASP division became so successful, it transcended the Dominator name and became Vapid's premier performance division. It was also responsible for transforming the Saddler into the Firebolt, which speaks for itself, I think. But as we all know, the market grew hungry for yet another Dominator. And this was the big one. In fact, one could argue the Dominator of the mid-2000s was just as important as the very first. It was more than just an homage to the Dominators of old, it was the slightly fatter reflection, sporting a recessed grille complete with those notches and round headlights, a slick-back roof, tail lip, and classic barred taillights. It captured everything about the original muscle car charm, right down to its crank handle windows and steering wheel primed to decimate your frontal lobe. Take notes. This is what authenticity looks like. The critics agreed too. Every auto journal out there gushed about Vapid's bout into retrofuturism ad nauseum. Just like the Bullet, they'd somehow figured out how to repackage America's Cold War glory days for a new generation. And for better or worse, this gave Vapid the comfort not to worry about market trends, because they were the market trend. They even allowed a limited run of race-ready Dominators for those willing to shell out the cash, but people could also recognize it in the televised carnage on Arena Wars. Sometimes they'd even sell them out after the show, with the previous owner still stained in the upholstery. Its performance might not be anything superb, especially when compared to the ASP, but it still set the pace for modern muscle. Rest assured, this still has more horses than the average owner can handle, meaning in true Dominator fashion, it'll go from 0 to pedestrian across the street in the mere blink of an eye. But as the 21st century ticked into those double digits, culture had once again shifted. Mobile phones were no longer just the accessories to obnoxious valley girls and well-respected drug dealers. Everyone's favorite rent-a-militia went public on the Boss Hack, and Snapmatic was filling its database with filtered 4x3s of people's vacuous lives and private bits at sunset. All the while, Vapid was developing its next generation of Dominator. By the end of the decade, it was no secret sales had been slumping. That nasty financial crisis might have deterred younger buyers, but there was no shortage of seniors looking to cash in their retirement money before their kids could. Vapid knew this because the nostalgia checks were beginning to split 3 ways, thanks to the all-new Gauntlet and rustlings about a new retro-inspired Vajero. Fast forward to 2015, when Vapid was unveiling its newest Dominator with the world. But this time, it was a bit more polarizing. This is the GTX, or GT Experimental, internally called the Dominatrix. In an effort to escape that retro fatigue the market was beginning to suffer from, the minds at Vapid wiped the slate clean, perhaps a little too clean. This new generation took a much more aggressive tone, so aggressive that simply driving one gave you unresolved anger issues. The GT-inspired rigidity was smoothed out with flowing body lines and bulkier portions. The grille was cut in half, its round headlamps were pulled across the fender, and its radiator was stretched out like a duvet. But the thing people noticed most was that mess of lights on the rear deck lid. Gone were the sacred Dominator taillights, instead replaced with a bow tie of over-designed LEDs. All for the love of the game. The internet did not take these changes lightly. The GTX's core value was putting the Dominator ahead of the styling curve, but it didn't completely throw the baby boomer out with the bathwater. Remnants of the older styling cues like side vents, bolstered rear quarters, and a well-defined tail lip were all still baked into the design. But if that stubby trunk was any smaller, the GTX could be considered a hot hatch. On a more positive note, the front grille accent lights that looked like snake fangs wore a nice touch. Although, instead of the Snake Eater package, this Dominator came from factory with an Aerospec performance package. Vapid's direct induction competition kit came as an optional extra in the dealership pamphlet. Circling it ensured your pony car came with 2 massive hood vents, a carbon fiber roof, and a spoiler to help with all those scary turns. But if that wasn't enough, select dealers could add a touring car-inspired spoiler called the Aerodyne fin. On the inside, the GTX saw many quality of life improvements, like a fancy infotainment screen, airbags, climate controls with more than 1 vent, and 1 whole cup holder. That being said, this interior is still one of the most cursed things on the market. Vapid gave it an automatic shifter, a clutch pedal, flappy paddles, and an auto hold. The infotainment screen has a rotary dial when it probably shouldn't, but the cherry on top is this push-start ignition with 2 options for 2-wheel drive and 4 low. Unless Vapid was planning a tow package, this was table scrap from the Cara. Despite the harsh first impressions it received from enthusiasts, the GTX quickly gained market traction, and eventually usurped its predecessor. But despite all of this, the aftermarket support for the GTX was nothing short of a tragedy. When it came to asphalt, the GTX was a different beast than what had come before. That's because it was terrible in nearly every way. First off, Vapid must have hidden an anvil in here because the car weighs an extra 150 pounds. Second, they debuted the GTX with this super ECU that was supposed to optimize gear ratios, stiffen suspension, and regulate fuel consumption in real time. None of these things worked as intended. The added weight gave it a 0 to 60 figure so horrendous, we're not going to tell you. It also turned out Vapid's super ECU was more of a super dud. That's because any uneven patch of road could trick the system into preventing you from shifting, or upshift you without so much as lifting a finger. It couldn't calibrate the suspension profiles properly either, leaving the driver with 4 pogo sticks at high speed. But that last part was never really an issue, considering the fuel consumption gimmick was just a speed governor. All this time, Vapid could have put through a software patch to fix these gremlins, but it was cheaper for them to warranty a new transmission or class action lawsuit than it was to recall them. It also turns out adding a strut brace doesn't do all that much when the car is programmed to actively destroy itself. Even after Vapid reconciled many of the GTX's issues, the damage had been done. They knew they'd have to try just a little bit harder next time. Meet the GT. No extra letters or performance plagues, just the basics. Domination has a new name. That was the slogan Vapid chose to plaster across the nation's billboards, halftime ads, and hush-smush pop-ups, ensuring that nearly every surface middle-aged men gazed upon, a GT could stare back. It was true the GT wasn't a brand new generation of Dominator, but it was still more than just a simple facelift. To do this, they put the car on a diet, dialed back the stylistic aggression, and sent that ECU back to the hell from which it came, giving the car impressive handling and a much more respectable top speed. And yes, the taillights were normal again. With a much more streamlined profile, the GT allows drivers to stop at pumps 3 times a week instead of the usual 7. It could also be spec'd with intakes, spoilers, side vents, and stripes to your heart's content. All the hallmark ways of becoming a rolling neon sign reading, "Hey officer, I'm due for a traffic stop." The interior also remains mostly the same, except now they've removed the labels on that push start, so credit where it's due. Undoubtedly, Vapid is already constructing the next generation of its warhorse, a Dominator prepped for battle on all fronts, with its crosshairs set a little higher on the performance car food chain. That is, assuming private dealerships don't devour the secondhand market overnight, or that Vapid doesn't pull the plug on its last remaining car. I can only imagine the Dominator name reduced to some kind of SUV plug-in. One way or another, you're going to want to hold on to these things. Because if time has taught us anything, no one ever knows they're in the good times until they aren't.